There's a story we've all been told about the Second World War. It's a story of steel, fire, and a special kind of genius. It's the legend of seemingly invincible machines born from a nation's unmatched engineering talent. We see it everywhere, in documentaries, movies, and the way we talk about quality. You know the names: the Tiger tank, the Messerschmitt 262 jet fighter, the V-2 rocket. These are the icons of German technological supremacy, weapons so advanced they've become symbols of an army that was only beaten by overwhelming numbers. We've all heard it. Germany may have lost the war, but they had the best tech, better equipped soldiers, more brilliant generals, and engineers who were simply playing a different sport. And it's a great story. It's got that whole tragic, flawed genius vibe, a war machine that if it just had a little more time, a few more resources, would have been completely unstoppable.
But that story is a lie. It's a carefully constructed myth, born from the ashes of defeat and polished by decades by the very men who lost the war. The real story isn't on the glorious propaganda posters or in the dramatic newsreels. It's not in the kill-to-loss ratios debated endlessly on internet forums. The real story, the one that actually decided the war, is buried in mud-choked repair depots, scribbled in frantic maintenance logs, and scattered on the side of frozen Russian roads, littered with abandoned German superweapons. The truth is, Germany's superior technology was in many ways its own worst enemy. The very complexity that made these weapons look so amazing on paper made them a logistical nightmare in reality. Germany wasn't just defeated by Allied numbers, it was defeated by its own philosophy. It built weapons for a fantasy war of perfect duels and ideal conditions, while the Allies built machines for the ugly, brutal reality of a world at war. And today, we're going to deconstruct that myth, piece by painful piece, and reveal how Germany's obsession with over-engineered masterpieces cost them everything.
To understand the appeal of the myth, you first have to appreciate its power. And on paper, the legend of German engineering is truly seductive. When the Panzer V, the Panther, first rolled onto the Eastern Front, it sent a shockwave through the Allies. Here was a tank with thick, sloped armor that could shrug off enemy shells, and a long, high-velocity 75mm cannon that could knock out a Soviet T-34 from a mile away. It looked like the perfect killing machine. And then there was the Tiger, the Panzer VI. Weighing in at nearly 60 tons, this thing wasn't just a tank, it was a mobile fortress. Its main weapon, the legendary 88mm gun, was originally an anti-aircraft cannon, so powerful and accurate that it could obliterate Allied tanks long before they were even in range to shoot back. Imagine being an Allied soldier in a Sherman tank, facing a Tiger. You knew you were fundamentally outclassed. The Tiger's front armor was so thick that most Allied anti-tank weapons were practically useless against it. To the guys on the ground, these weren't just machines, they were monsters. And it wasn't just on the ground. In the skies, the Luftwaffe introduced the world to jet combat with the Messerschmitt Me-262. When Allied bomber crews first saw these futuristic aircraft streaking past them, 100 miles an hour faster than their P-51 escorts, it felt like a glimpse into a terrifying future. Armed with 4 30mm cannons, an Me-262 could, in theory, tear a B-17 Flying Fortress to shreds in a single pass. It was a technological leap so huge, it seemed to threaten the entire Allied air campaign. Meanwhile, Germany was pioneering technologies that wouldn't go mainstream for decades. They developed the first guided missiles, like the Fritz X-bomb that famously sank the Italian battleship Roma. They created the V-1 buzz bomb, basically a primitive cruise missile, and of course, the V-2. The V-2 was the world's first true ballistic missile, a weapon that touched the edge of space before silently falling on its target at supersonic speed. It was an instrument of pure terror, and it proved a level of scientific achievement no other country could match. So, the legend was born. It was born from the very real fear of Allied soldiers and the incredible specifications on the page. Powerful guns, thick armor, jet engines, and the dawn of the space age. Looking at it this way, you can see why the myth took hold. How could an army with such an amazing technological edge actually lose? Well, the answer isn't a matter of what if, but a brutal accounting of cost, complexity, and catastrophic failure.
The story of the Panther tank is the single best example of the fatal flaw in Germany's entire engineering philosophy. Rushed into production to counter the surprisingly effective Soviet T-34, the Panther was supposed to be the weapon that won the Eastern Front. It had it all: a killer gun, great sloped armor, and good speed for its size. In many ways, it was the blueprint for the modern bank tank, but it was also a mechanical train wreck. The Panther was shoved into its first major battle at Kursk in the summer of 1943, riddled with unresolved technical problems. The results weren't just disappointing, they were a disaster. Of the roughly 200 Panthers that started the offensive, only a small fraction were still running a few days later. But here's the shocking part. They weren't all destroyed by the Soviets. The vast majority were lost to mechanical breakdowns. The core of the problem was its over-engineered design. The most famous failure was its final drive system, the gears transferring power to the tracks. This system was originally designed for a much lighter tank. In the 45-ton Panther, it was constantly understressed and would fail with horrifying regularity. Early models could suffer a catastrophic failure in as little as 150 kilometers, or just over 90 miles. Imagine a brand new car whose transmission was guaranteed to explode before you even needed your first oil change. That was the reality for Panther crews. And this wasn't just a simple teething problem. Germany was running out of high-quality alloys needed to make durable gears, so they used inferior metals that just couldn't handle the strain. Driving a Panther required a delicate touch. A sharp turn or even just reversing could shred the gears. It was a thoroughbred racehorse forced to pull a plow, a beautiful piece of machinery totally unsuited for the brutal, dirty work of war. The engine was another constant headache. It was prone to overheating and fuel leaks, and the engine bay was so tightly packed it was a serious fire hazard. Early Panthers were famous for catching fire, sometimes for no other reason than running the engine too hard. While these issues were improved in later models, the Panther's reputation for being unreliable was sealed. This fragility was devastating on the battlefield. A tank that isn't running is just a 45-ton steel box. It can't advance, can't retreat, and it can't be easily recovered. The Panther was so heavy that only a few specialized German recovery vehicles could even dream of towing it. If one broke down in a bad spot, the crew was usually abandoned and set it on fire. The operational readiness numbers tell the story in stark numbers. After Kursk, the percentage of Panthers ready to fight hovered at a dismal 16 to 37%. That means for every one Panther ready for combat, 2 or 3 were sitting in a workshop. While those numbers improved when units were resting and refitting, they would plummet as soon as a real campaign started. This was the complete opposite of its main rival. The Soviet T-34 was a crude and simple machine, but it was reliable, it was tough. A Soviet tank corps could drive hundreds of kilometers and expect most of its tanks to still be running at the end. That was a feat German Panther battalions could only dream of. The Panther was a masterpiece of design, but a failure of engineering. It promised dominance but delivered a logistical nightmare, defeating itself far more often than the enemy ever did.
If the Panther was a flawed masterpiece, the Tiger was a paradox. It was a weapon so powerful, so resource-intensive, and so mechanically demanding that its very existence crippled the German war effort. The Tiger is the German philosophy of quality over quantity taken to its most illogical extreme. One-on-one, the Tiger was probably the most formidable tank of the war. Its reputation for near invincibility was earned. But a tank's real value isn't measured in duels, it's measured in its ability to be in the right place at the right time. By that measure, the Tiger was a strategic failure. The first problem was its insane complexity and cost. Germany produced only 1,350 Tiger Is in the entire war. To put that in perspective, the United States built almost 50,000 M4 Sherman tanks. The Soviet Union produced even more T-34s. For every single Tiger that rolled off the line, the Allies were churning out dozens of their own tanks. The Germans brought a finely crafted rapier against an opponent wielding a sledgehammer factory. Building a Tiger wasn't a modern assembly line process. It was more like a craftsman's workshop. Hand fitting required skilled laborers that Germany was running out of. This complexity carried over to maintenance. The Tiger's interleaved road wheels gave it a smooth ride, but they were a mechanic's nightmare. To replace one inner road wheel, a crew might have to remove half of the outer wheels first. In the mud and ice of the Eastern Front, these wheels would get packed with frozen gunk, sometimes immobilizing the tank completely. And then there was its drinking problem: fuel. The Tiger's powerful engine was moving a 57-ton beast, and it guzzled fuel at a rate of less than half a mile per gallon in rough terrain. For a nation already facing a severe fuel crisis, deploying Tigers was a logistical drain on the entire army. Tanks were often abandoned not because of enemy fire, but because they simply ran out of gas. Like the Panther, the Tiger was plagued by reliability issues. Its transmission and engine were pushed to their absolute limits and broke down constantly. And because of its colossal weight, getting it out of trouble was nearly impossible. It took 2, sometimes 3 of Germany's heaviest recovery vehicles to tow a single disabled Tiger. In a retreat, this was a fantasy. Crews were once again forced to abandon and destroy their multi-million Reichsmark machines. So while some post-war stats show decent operational rates for Tiger units, sometimes around 70% when they weren't in heavy combat, those numbers are deeply misleading. They don't show the enormous logistical tail of mechanics and spare parts needed to get that rate. They don't show the Tiger battalions left behind in a retreat because they broke down, and they don't show the strategic options Germany lost because so much fuel and transport was tied up supporting these few elite tanks. The Tiger was a tactical titan, but a strategic liability. It was the wrong tank for the war Germany was actually fighting. Each Tiger built represented steel, man-hours, and fuel that could have produced several more reliable and flexible Panzer IVs or assault guns. It was a weapon that looked magnificent in a parade, but on the unforgiving battlefields of World War II, it was a beautiful, powerful, and ultimately foolish waste.
While Germany was betting everything on exquisite, over-engineered superweapons, the Allies were playing a completely different game. Their philosophy was built on reliability, standardization, and overwhelming quantity. It was the triumph of good enough, the victory of boring. And its 2 greatest champions were the American M4 Sherman and the Soviet T-34. Let's be clear, one-on-one against a Panther or a Tiger, a Sherman was outmatched. Its guns struggled to punch through their frontal armor, while they could kill a Sherman from a mile away. Allied crews knew this, and the psychological toll was huge. But war isn't a series of duels. It's about logistics, attrition, and numbers. And in that war, the Sherman was a masterpiece. The Sherman was designed for one thing above all: mass production. American industry churned them out at a mind-boggling rate, nearly 50,000 of them. Parts were standardized, simplifying maintenance and repair enormously. Most importantly, the Sherman was reliable. Its engine was a rugged workhorse, easy to fix in the field. Its transmission and suspension could handle the abuse of combat without the constant breakdowns that plagued its German counterparts. An American armored division could travel for hundreds of miles, confident that most of its tanks would still be running when they got there. And here's a critical point: crew survivability. Designed to let its crew get out alive, tanks were replaceable, but trained crews were not. The Soviet T-34 took this philosophy to an even greater extreme. It was a crude, uncomfortable tank that lacked the fancy optics of its German rivals, but it could be produced in immense numbers, and it was brutally tough. Its wide tracks gave it superb mobility in the mud and snow that bogged down the heavier German tanks.
The Allied doctrine wasn't to send one Sherman to fight one Tiger. It was to use their numbers to swarm the enemy. 3 or 4 Shermans would work together, using their speed to flank the slower German heavies and get a shot at their weaker side armor. They won not with a superior vehicle, with superior tactics, superior numbers, and operational reliability to actually execute those tactics. This was the solution to the German superweapon problem. It wasn't about building a better Tiger, it was about building a system that could defeat the Tiger, a system of mass production, robust logistics, and reliable machines. Germany had built the world's best dueling pistols, while the Allies had built a relentless, unstoppable machine gun. In the brutal math of total war, the machine gun always wins.
So if the evidence of mechanical failure and strategic folly is so clear, why does the myth of German superiority persist? The answer has as much to do with post-war propaganda as it does with history. The myth wasn't an accident, it was constructed, and its chief architects were the defeated German generals themselves. After the war, the Western Allies faced a new enemy, the Soviet Union. To create a strong West Germany as a buffer, they needed to rehabilitate the image of the German military. This gave former Wehrmacht leaders like Franz Halder and Heinz Guderian a golden opportunity. Working with the U.S. Army's Historical Division, they were asked to write their histories of the war. Naturally, they wrote a version of history that made them look good. Their story was designed to absolve the German officer corps of 2 things: their role in Nazi war crimes and their responsibility for losing the war. To explain their defeat, they came up with a couple of convenient excuses. Excuse number 1, blame Hitler. All the big strategic mistakes, they claimed, were the fault of the Führer's insane meddling. If only he had listened to his brilliant generals, Germany would have won. They conveniently forgot that they had eagerly supported Hitler's plans when they were succeeding. Excuse number 2, blame the overwhelming numbers. They painted the Wehrmacht as a small, professional force of tactical geniuses who were simply buried under an avalanche of Soviet soldiers in American factories. This narrative served to make them look even better. We weren't outfought, we were just outnumbered. And this is where the myth of technological superiority became their masterstroke. By hyping up the quality of their tanks and aircraft, they reinforced the quality versus quantity narrative. They talked endlessly about the Tiger's 88mm gun and the Me-262's speed. It made their tactical wins seem more brilliant and their ultimate defeat an unavoidable tragedy, not their own failure. The legend of the superweapons became the key to restoring their tarnished honor. They may have lost the war, but they had the best army with the best stuff. It was incredibly appealing. It was simple and dramatic. Wargamers, model builders, and popular historians focused on the exciting tech specs in battlefield duels, ignoring the boring but decisive realities of logistics and reliability. The Allies didn't challenge the narrative too hard either. Portraying the Wehrmacht as a near-superhuman foe made the Allied victory look even more heroic. So the myth took root, told by defeated generals to save their reputations, and embraced by a popular culture that loves a good story more than the complicated truth.
So the next time you see the imposing silhouette of a Tiger tank, remember the full story. Don't just see the powerful cannon and thick armor. See the trail of broken transmissions, the empty fuel tanks, and the crippling logistical burden it represented. The story of World War II technology isn't a simple tale of German genius versus Allied brute force. It's a much more interesting story about 2 competing philosophies. One worshipped complexity and perfection. The other embraced simplicity in mass production. One led to magnificent, fragile machines that were a nightmare to maintain. The other led to an unstoppable tide of steel that ground its enemy to dust. Germany didn't lose the war because its engineers weren't brilliant. It lost, in part, because that brilliance was tragically misapplied. They built weapons for a demonstration, not for a war. And in the end, it was the humble, dependable, and boring machines that won. But I want to know what you think.
Was the obsession with wonder weapons Germany's biggest mistake, or was defeat inevitable anyway? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. This is a huge debate, and every perspective helps us all learn more.